Well, joining me now live in our Lagos studio to discuss this development and the twist that we've had so far, I have Economic Affairs Analyst Tomiwa Aladekomo. Good to have you on the breakfast show this morning.
Morning, how are you?
What do you make of, very fine, thank you. What do you make of the twist that we saw? Because on Friday, the association was pretty clear on what it wanted to achieve. There would be suspension of the USSD services to banks. And this was an unshaken fate they had at the end of the day. But it was also looking at phased suspension or withdrawal of services, especially looking at those with the biggest debt. But then, when I had the intervention of the CBN as well to play the role of mediator, bring them to the round table and let's us solve the situation amicably. Yes, there's a debt to be paid, but we have to address things, putting the consumers in mind. What do you make of this whole mix?
I think the fact that suspension was going to get, of services was going to get cancelled was definitely, or at least suspended in the immediate, was definitely going to happen. It needed to happen, and it was going to happen. There was no way that you would allow that service to be phased out immediately to the millions of consumers all over the country that are using it. The impact for the banks, for the consumers, would be too much for either the banks or the ministries or the CBN to be able to allow it to go forward. I think it's become very, very clear that this has become an essential pillar of the way that people access banking services, and there are too many people concerned about our financial inclusion, about people's access to services, to allow that to happen. Now, what that means is that the ministries have to put their regulators have to pull their weight in terms of making sure that resolutions are found to this. There definitely are questions about sort of how you apply this costing going forward, who carries the cost. It's an issue that really should have been resolved over a year ago. I think 18 months now. This conversation's been going on, and it's been going on with quite some intensity. The truth of the matter is that you would think the telcos and the banks would be able to resolve it themselves without the intervention of the regulators. However, it definitely, was critical, and any regulator worth the assault was definitely not going to allow this to go forward. And so I think what's going to be interesting, if you look at it in the near future, is how do they resolve this? The banks, the telcos are saying, look, if you want to pass on this cost to the consumers, that's up to you. You pass on the cost to the consumers, but we need to get paid if they are using this. And the banks, so it's an interesting sort of balance. You've seen the banks do it with SMS alerts and sort of email alerts, where it started as a cost center, but over time they started to charge the user for it. And so the question is, do we move forward to end user billing?
So that's the biggest question on the minds of so many people now. To face off this 42 billion naira debt is a whole lot of chunk to deal with. So now the fear is that the end user, the average Nigerian, those who still do not necessarily have smartphones or internet, and that's just the basis for even applying for this. And then looking at the COVID-19 pandemic as well, this also eliminated to a very large extent human interface. But how do we prevent the end users, average Nigerians, the customers, from having to bear this brunt in terms of the charges? Because over time, we've, in the area of financial literacy and what the information being churned out, interpreting that clearly, we've not had the best of foot being put forward in terms of financial institutions and then their customers. How do you think we can manage the exploitative tendencies that may be in this payments?
I will say that, I think the banks, and I'll give credit to the regulator here, to the CBN, have done a tremendous amount of innovation over the last sort of decade, 2 decades of sort of like financial services in Nigeria. USSD is not something that 10 years ago was nearly as prominent or as essential in the lives of customers, and it's been huge, sort of starting with GTB and evolving through all the other banks. The innovation and making it quite central. Now, the key thing when you have sort of innovative new services is how do you pay for it? And really, they should have resolved this right from the introduction of the service. My sense is that the 42 billion is going to be for the banks and the telcos to deal with. They will figure out how they resolve that among themselves.
Phase payments and all of
phase payments, staggered payments. What the question is going to be is, going forward, does the consumer start to bear the cost on a per session basis? And that means that each time you use USSD, maybe you get a 20 naira charge or a 25 naira charge from Glo or MTN or whatever it is, saying that that was the cost for that session. Now, of course, having paid transaction costs on online transactions, paid transaction costs,
for your ATM and the whole
for your ATM and all of that. Most people don't want to bear an additional cost for USSD, but the truth of the matter is that each of these other sort of avenues of accessing services have a charge associated with them. So it's been great to get essentially, I mean, you could look at it as a free ride on USSD, but it is possible that moving forward, that's not going to happen again. I don't think the resolution of the 42 billion will come onto the consumers. I think the question that the banks and the telco have to answer is, moving forward, what are we charging the consumers? Are we charging the consumers? And then it also gives an opportunity for the innovative bank or telco, but more likely the banks, to say, you know what, we're going to eat the cost of this. Like, here's an opportunity for us to differentiate ourselves from the other banks and say, you know, because we care about our consumers, you know, we are going to take on the cost of this. And so there's a real cost. I think it's important to recognize that there's a real cost to using these services. But the question of where that cost lands on a per session basis going forward is the one that has to get resolved.
And we also have the celebration of the Consumer Rights Day within this month as well. Now, this also brings to the fore situations or some sharp practices that pertain in different climes and different sectors of the economy. But now, in terms of addressing concerns of customers, the turnaround time, response time to all of this complaint and a whole lot more, looking at improved financial inclusion, what sort of new space of evolution do you expect now as we're leveraging on the digital economy, the digital space, especially as we're still dealing with the COVID-19 challenges? We have queues outside banks. We still need to look at innovative, unique, contextually acceptable innovations and plans that can help ease of these old challenges that we're having at this point in time in terms of financial service and solutions.
You know, one of the things I always say is you have to look at your market and look at your market as it is, not as you wish it was. I think one of the big innovations over the last couple of years has been agent banking and the massive explosion of agent banking. Again, that's something that you could say is actually a step.
Tomiwa, sorry to cut you there, but we'll just have to pause you on that note, and then we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll just continue our discussion.
No problem.
And we're still having our feature on the show today, looking at the financial services sector. And I have with me in our Lagos studio, Tomiwa Aladekomo. Good to have you. Still stay with us on the News at the Czar. Now, let's talk about innovative platforms and service solutions, especially as we have the COVID-19 pandemic still ravaging on. We have to limit, reduce, eliminate as much as possible human interface. Now, looking at the part of telecom operators in terms of services within the telecommunications sector and also the banking sector, you still see the large queues of people trying to access the banks, going into the banking halls as well. How much of an important pillar is this to build on, especially as we are trying to move forward in terms of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think, listen, for the future of...
And then still thinking customer first.
So I think for the future of the Nigerian economy, the digital economy is absolutely crucial. And so there are a range of places where we need expansion of opportunity, expansion of access for people. So I think probably the most important thing in terms of financial services, but also just customers accessing the digital economy, is the expansion of broadband access across the country. From a literacy perspective, you definitely have some issues in there, but what you find is that as the cost of broadband, as the reach of broadband and the penetration of it increases, people learn. I mean, your child will teach you, your peers will teach you. So I really think, sort of from a long-term perspective, one of the most important things is continue to push our broadband development plan. Last year, you saw right-of-way fees sort of crash across different states. A few states have shown sort of innovation and a willingness to sort of really push the telcos to come and bring, or the broadband providers to come and sort of lay cables. You've seen Ekiti State, sort of create a business zone and, push, I think, Main One and some of the other broadband producers to bring cable fiber into their states. You need more of that across the country, because those things sort of deepen the pool. So you can't ask people to use online banking services or internet-based services when there's no access. There's no internet access for them wherever it is that they are. And so things like USSD, things like agent banking are sort of low-hanging, easy to use. They allow sort of people without much education, without tons of access to do that. So I think agent banking, again, it's relatively lo-fi. It doesn't look like what you think the future of banking looks like. But the truth of the matter is that in a country like ours, the more that you have, the more people you can serve, the more effective it is, the bigger the range of services those people have, then the more people you can serve.
And this is dealing with the issues of the time.
Yeah. It's dealing with issues of time. It's not having people sort of cramped up inside the banking hall that tend to be small on the side of the road. It doesn't eliminate human interaction, but it does reduce some of the pressure in terms of people crowding into spaces. And so you need services like that to be moving forward and to be expanding. You need USSD definitely to stay in play for a long time. But at the same time, you want to push your education system, you want to push your broadband access so that more and more people start to come into the 21st century in terms of what it is that they can actually use and access in terms of the way the rest of the world is. And again, this speaks to more than just banking. This speaks to more than just access to some services. It speaks to, as an economy, how do we grow as a whole?
Talking about the economy now in terms of politics and then the political space as well, the policy direction of the Minister of Communication as well and digital economy, this is also coming into bear. What sort of course do you expect him to chart now in terms of consolidating or leveraging on technology this time around, and then other little low-hanging fruits that you've made mention of at this point in time for the year 2021? We're still having shocks that we shouldn't be dealing with.
I mean, I've been on this show before and I've spoken about some of my concerns about the vision or lack thereof of the administration as a whole in terms of how they think about the economy. We would hope that there is a vision and a plan for the digital economy, which again is heavily focused on things like expanding broadband access. Again, a moment ago, I just spoke about some states are moving forward on this, are thinking innovatively about this. But as a ministry, do you see a focused and concerted plan that's being pushed and exerted and worked towards? It's not really as clear that they have a clear vision of where it is that they'd like to go and are pushing as aggressively as they should be. You tend to see these interventions when you have issues with the USSD to kind of
we have to be proactive,
you want to be proactive. You want to have a clear vision of where it is that we should be going. And so if I were a minister in this particular situation, it's like, well, we're going to get an extra 50 million people into broadband access over the next 2 to 5 years. What needs to be done? Like, what are the steps?
The way we also have the NIN as well, the whole saga, the back and forth. What sort of interventions do we expect within that space, and a whole lot more?
So you want better planning for things like that, you know what I mean? And that was a debacle. And I mean, and you have at the moment things like you can't get a new SIM. You can't because the rollout of that has been so poorly handled. And so, yeah, you want a ministry that is sort of thinking a lot more long-term, that is more proactive in terms of the way they think about the rollout of services or the rollout of, policy like this. Definitely there's a lot that they could be doing better.
And we just want to see greater synergy in terms of the banking and then the telecom space. And at the end of the day, these are the drivers in terms of the Nigerian stock market. Investments are growing within that space, and it's only really the only cash cow that we have to leverage on at this point in time to make economic sense. The big concern,
if you look at it, is that banking and telco are the biggest sectors, but the truth of the matter is that these are supposed to be underlying sectors to the rest of the economy.
Exactly.
And so you want to see other sectors growing dramatically because the foundation for them is sort of solid. And that's where I think we're not moving in the right direction as a country. The fact that those two industries remain sort of these giant cash cows without you seeing other sectors sort of like rising dramatically.
Thank you very much for your time on the Breakfast Show today, Tomoa Aladekomo. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and hopefully we have government and then all of the key sectors and then players within the field take cues from all we've discussed so far this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you once again.
All right then.